Hello everyone, this is Yogesh here. I'm from aieducation.com and today we're going to discuss about why Langchain is important, why you are choosing the Langchain. So if you've seen my last video, we discussed about the GenAI ecosystem and we also discussed about like what are the options are available in each of the basically segment, because GenAI application is basically a combination of multiple blocks, right? Each blocks have a certain options and we can decide upon whether we want number one or number two or number three, right? So in that series basically we have to choose the orchestrators where we want to decide like whether we want to go ahead with tool number one, tool number two, tool number three. So that's why Langchain came into picture, and I want to just give a detailed discussion on why we chose Langchain, what are the building blocks of Langchain, and so forth basically. Let me go to my screen. So here the agenda wise we're gonna touch upon the first functional API first. Then we also understand about the Langchain definition and understanding. We also discuss about the API call versus what is the difference between Langchain call. Then finally the key advantages, why we chose the Langchain and how basically beneficial it is. And finally we discuss about the component of Langchain, right? So these are the pieces will be there. Coming to the functional API. So let's first understand what do you mean by functional API, right? So API is simple in the programming language. It is called application programming interface. What do you mean by that? So you are, let's suppose, created an application using some application. This is application where your job is to provide some input, and based on that input you might receive some output, right? So take an example of ChatGPT where you provide some input like what is the weather condition today in Delhi, and based on that you will receive like it is 22-degree cold and probably 50% chance of rain. So that's the response you'll get it basically from the this application. Now do you understand like how this input is getting processed and finally generating the output? There might be certain logics are there, certain APIs are there which is getting called in this application, but how it is basically streamlined, right? So the streamlining part is done by the API. So what API basically will do, now this application will get connected to the users, right? Here there will be the API part which will take the users input. It will go to the server where basically your LLMs and other logical part will reside. It basically pass this input to LLM. LLM will generate some output. It says output back to the API back, and then from the API it shows to the users, right? So the whole bridge between user and the server, right, is acted through the API. So basically in the backend of the UI, right, like in the ChatGPT UI, basically here whenever you type it, it's basically API is getting called, doing some sort of operations there using the engine, again reverting back the output and showcase to you in the screen. So the whole thing is done by the API, right? So that's the API means. Now what do you mean by functional API, right? I mean it's both are same, but in the definitive term it is like a process of sending the request. Request is nothing but here data I'm talking about directly to the LLM providers, right? Now here's the catch. When I say LLM provider API, now this API can be built by their parent organization. So OpenAI is there, they have built their own API. Then when you come to cloud, they have their own API. When you come to Gemini, they have their own API, and when you come to Meta, they have their own API. So each of the providers will basically gives their respective APIs, which you can see in a system also in this image. If you see this function which is calling OpenAI, and here we are calling the OpenAI API, and passing like what is the weather in Paris, right? And finally we are getting some response back. So that's how we call the OpenAI API. When it comes to Anthropic, again it is the Anthropic package. We are passing the API key, we are calling their wrapper function, whatever they wrote, client.message.create, whereas in the OpenAI, we wrote client.chat.completion.create, right? So you see the difference. Basically, the way of calling OpenAI is completely different than the Anthropic right now. And then we pass the model name, the token size, messages like what is the weather in Paris, and finally we get a response. Now, what is basically the issue could analyze is right now, if let's suppose my application A, I built it, and in 2025 I built using OpenAI because they are giving flexible and very cheap plans, which is beneficial for my business, and their output is also accurate. Tomorrow in 2027, let's suppose Anthropic comes with a very blasting model, which is nearly 99.999% accurate, and they have a rate similar or cheaper than the OpenAI. Probably I might want to switch to the Anthropic, and that's where the problem comes. I have to change a lot of things here, just to change one model, whole basically GenAI, right? And that's where a lot of frameworks has born. They identified this problem because this is not interportable. One API request cannot be interportable to Anthropic or maybe OpenAI or maybe Gemini. They have their different nomenclature, their different standards are there, which they are following according to their organization, but they're not following as a general thumb rule of standard or basically norms, right? And that's the key disadvantages in the functional API calling. Correct. I'm going to discuss about the solution for this, but this is the functional API part basically, right? So functional API is, if you just comes in a very layman term, it is kind of third party API where you're passing some payload and finally you're getting the response. So that's the whole meaning of the API part. Now coming to Langchain, right? So first understand what is this Langchain means, right? Here first term means lang, which is nothing but language, and the second term means your chain. So if I talk in a very layman term again, Langchain is built to basically provide developers a way where they can write the LLM application in a very language manner, like you write in English sentences, that's a language, plus chain. There are a lot of components are there which can be chained together to finally form an application. So that's the Langchain, the annotations, right? Now what is really Langchain in a definition term? So if I just read this one, Langchain is open composable framework that provide a standard interface. Now note this part, standard interface for every model. So you've seen in the last slide what problem was basically those two, OpenAI and your Anthropic, were not similar in terms of the way of the calling. It was very difficult if you want to switch to one or to another basically, right? And that's where the Langchain came with a basically the solution. Say that I have a function which will call OpenAI also, I'll call Anthropic also, here there is a Gemini also, and to cater the problem what I see in the last slide, I will write the function so that user just has to pass the name of the model whichever they want to utilize, and the output is also very standard, right? Because Anthropic might write the output in some other way, whereas the OpenAI write in some other way. To make it standard both input and output, the Langchain provides the wrappers, right? So these are the wrapper functions which internally basically built by Langchain team to take care of the problems what developer were facing, right? Now let's suppose your applications are there where you're using the Langchain framework and doing some sort of operations, and if you just want to switch to the LLM model, you just need to change a function. And if you see in this GIF image, I'm utilizing Langchain.llm package, where a lot of packages are there like Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, anything you name it, Cohere, and in the place of model I'm just calling that function, right? Whether it is Anthropic or whether it is OpenAI. And it is not just for LLM, it could be like for database, it could be like for anything, right? And now the whole functionality of my application do not get changed. That's the beauty of Langchain, right? So what would have been the day's job in the real world, now it has solved in a minutes. Correct? So that's your Langchain basically does for you, right? It provides a standard interface for both model, tool, database, so that you can build the LLM application and adapt it on the evolving ecosystem. When I say evolving, every day when you talk in a GenAI, one or other tool or framework getting developed, right? So that's where we need a standard interface which takes care of this complete pieces, because everyone cannot follow a single norms, right? Let's suppose take an example of your Windows laptop, which is like provides generally your A type USB, whereas in the Mac systems it provides the USB-C, right? It doesn't mean that Windows cannot provide USB-C, but that's their USP. They're providing USB-A from so long and they want to continue with that. Whereas iOS might want to change to USB-C because that is more profitable, right? Now, if let's suppose I want really to work with these two systems together, how would I do that? I need some adapter, some connector which connects from C to A or A to C, right? And that's where your Langchain basically doing that job. So it is kind of a adapter which basically connects different ports from one to another. Some key advantages: open source, so it is free to use, just install packages and start using it. Expensive integration, right? Now if you see last video also, I talked about the integration, and that's where the integration with the LLM provider, database, debugger, cloud, anything you name it, you will find it in the Langchain. Lifecycle coverage: when I talk about lifecycle, it starts from development, then it goes to debugging, and finally it goes to deployment, right? So everything will get covered in each of the life cycle using the different apps of the Langchain community, like langgraph is there, langsmith is there, all, and other pieces also there, which is basically taking care of these parts. Composable and future proof, as we discussed, whatever application right now coming, they are making sure that it is getting integrated in the Langchain ecosystem as well, so that it can be reached to the broader audience. So we are future secure while we use it. It is not going to obsolete in a very near future terms. Again, each and every thing has a expiry date, but at least for the certain time period we are sure that this might remain in the market, because this is widely adapted also right now and they are continuously growing up. So probably this will be there in the coming future as well, and we can utilize the learnings from here. Some alternatives are Llama Index and the Crew AI, which are also very good robust platform. You can visit from the internet basically on this. Coming back to the component, right? And what do I mean by component? Component is nothing but a building block, right? Which is kind of a foundations of any pieces, right? Let's suppose you create a dish, something called pizza, right? In pizza, basically, what do you need? You need the dough, you might need the onions, you might need some vegetables and all sort. So these are the ingredients basically what you are providing to basically it becomes a pizza, right? So consider these are the components. Without that, this pizza will be incomplete, right? Same way, Langchain, where these are the components, 6 components are there, major 6 components. Without that, Langchain will be incomplete, right? Now let's understand why this divided into multiple components, right? So considering GenAI application is mixture or maybe package solution which starts from something and ends from end to something, right? And in between that it touches the multiple points, right? And each points have a different job to do. So to make it very distinctive, Langchain has divided these pieces in a very, very descriptive way, that the first part of a job will be done by this, second part of the job will be done by this, third part will be done by that, and so forth, right? So that's a descriptive way. That's the reason you see the different components right now. Major are model, prompt, chain, memory, indexes, and agent. Model is nothing but your wrapper for LLM models, chat models, embedding models. So those pieces will come under models. Prompting, it basically provides how you design it, format it, and manage it, right? So those pieces will come under prompt, like prompt template, chat prompt template, all sort of pieces. Chains, it basically comes together with a sequence of calls, because GenAI application is a pipeline, right, where each are basically tied together, right, binded together. So the output of the first will act as an input to second, and output of the second will act as an input to third, and so on. It doesn't mean that all GenAI applications are sequential in nature. It could be parallel, it could be like conditional way it has connected, but the whole idea is there is a connection, right? Connection is there between 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and so forth in some or other way. So that's where the chain concept will come into picture, and we'll talk about all the sequential, branch, and parallel chains, and also we'll also understand about the runnables part, which are the core of the chains. Then comes to memory. So memory is nothing but how well you remember the context, right? How much context you want to remember it, so that you can personalize the content for particular users, right? So that's where the memory will come. Finally comes to indexes. When we discuss the RAG application, if you're not aware about the RAG right now, don't worry, we will cover everything in a complete. But if you want to power the RAG basically with external data, documents, databases, API, etc., there the indexes will come into picture. And finally the agent. So forth, we discussed about like what we want to do and how we get to know the output. But understand, if something is very autonomous, right, which is powered by LLM itself, you don't need to provide any input, rather model will give their own input. That's where the agents will come into picture, and we'll also discuss about the agent part. So these are the 6 main components that drives your whole Langchain part. Okay, so what next? So from here on, in the next video, we're gonna discuss each and every component in a detailed way. So for each component, probably 1 or 2 videos will be there, where we discuss the theoretical part and also implement practically, right, using the Python and Langchain framework, install it on our application and make our hands dirty basically. So that's the piece which is gonna come in the coming video onwards, and stay tuned for that update. And I hope you like this video. Please do subscribe this channel, and do let me know if any comments are there. Thank you so much.